Welcome back to Planet Shmearth, the only show where 1 billion years of planetary evolution still feels like a recap episode. If you were hoping things would start speeding up, evolving eyeballs, or inventing something with a pulse, keep dreaming. We're still very much in the goo years. Because somehow this rock keeps spinning, and the slime keeps replicating, and now that once minor background character known as Oxygen is kicking in the door like it just got promoted. Welcome to the slow-motion, ecological upheaval nobody invited, but everybody has to survive. Let's get on with it. So now the planet smells like rust. The oceans are half-choked on their own chemical baggage, and microbes have started inventing body plans by accident. It's a miracle Earth hasn't just rage quit. But no, life is still here, still slime-based, still insisting it belongs. And now, with oxygen levels climbing from mild inconvenience to ecosystem coup, the real fun begins. Fun, of course, being a relative term. If you're a microbe, it's more like trying to nap in a burning building while your neighbor redecorates with acid. Let's zoom in on our old friend Oxygen. It's gotten confident, arrogant even. It's done rusting all the iron it can find. The oceans are now layered in iron oxide sludge like a bad detox smoothie. And since there's no more iron to sponge it up, oxygen starts leaking into the atmosphere like it owns the place, which, biologically speaking, it soon will. And this is not great for everyone. Anaerobes, those classic old-school microbes that thrived in Earth's original murder fog, are now on the endangered list. Oxygen is toxic to them. It gums up their enzymes, crashes their metabolism, and basically sets their insides on fire at a molecular level. It's like living in a world where the air is made of bleach. So, naturally, most of them just die. The lucky ones flee to deep mud, hydrothermal vents, or the geological equivalent of witness protection. Meanwhile, aerobic organisms, the ones that figured out how to use oxygen without immediately imploding, are having a moment. Their metabolism is stupidly efficient, like offensively efficient. They get so much more energy from food that they might as well be cheating, which, in evolutionary terms, they are. And with all this extra energy, things start to get unnecessarily complicated. Cells bulk up. They grow weird extensions. They develop internal scaffolding. Because why be a blob when you can be a blob with ambition? Some even start stashing nutrients in little vacuoles like hoarders prepping for biochemical winter. At the same time, the chemical cycles outside the cell are spinning out of control. The sulfur cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle, all tangled in a screaming codependent mess. Every new molecule released into the water changes the rules for everyone else. It's biochemical capitalism. Pollute or perish. And through all this, photosynthesis just keeps happening, relentlessly, annoyingly. Cyanobacteria, still drunk on their own chlorophyll, are blooming across every sunlit surface. They're not innovating, they're not changing, they're just outlasting everyone else with the smug, quiet power of eternal relevance. They're the reality TV stars of evolution. No talent, just persistence and brand recognition. Meanwhile, things on land continue to suck. Microbial crusts still cling to damp rocks like mildew with a grudge. They stain surfaces. They trap dust. They form the world's saddest soils, thin, crunchy films of decay that smell like wet paper towels and shattered dreams. Occasionally they erode something. Occasionally they survive a week. But mostly they just die and respawn in the same place like badly coded NPCs. And now that oxygen is in the air, these land crusts have a whole new problem. The UV death rays have chilled out slightly thanks to the ozone layer finally deciding to show up. But now there's oxidative stress, as in literal chemical stress, as in your cellular membrane is under constant attack from free radicals, which are basically microscopic chaos goblins trying to shred your DNA for fun. So the microbes evolve coping strategies. Some develop primitive antioxidants. Others huddle in shaded cracks and cry proteomic tears. A few figure out how to make biofilms thick enough to block the oxygen itself, which is like living in a plastic bag and calling it innovation. Elsewhere, evolution continues to be a screaming disaster. Eukaryotes, those big bloated cells with delusions of grandeur, are now everywhere. Some swim, some float. Some just sit around pretending they invented complexity, and a few are dabbling in community building again. That's right. Proto-multicellularity is back. This time, though, it's more organized. Cells aren't just accidentally stuck together. They're starting to coordinate. One set handles food intake, another does waste. One sad, unfortunate cell sacrifices itself as a structural wall, the first martyr of internal architecture. And in doing so, multicellularity inches closer to being an actual thing instead of a mistake that somehow didn't die. And the predators, they're evolving finesse. Instead of blindly ramming into their prey like drunk Roombas, some are developing ways to detect chemical gradients, scent essentially, but for proteins. Others are evolving pseudopodia, those creepy little false feet that let you crawl toward your meal like a horror movie directed by Jell-O. And their prey? Still trying to not be eaten. Spikes, shells, slime, speed. It's all happening. Slowly, painfully, with lots of casualties, because that's the state of life right now, slowly learning to either hunt or hide while everything around you turns into a crime scene. So predators are crawling around with their wobbly pseudopodia and protein-sensing snoots, and prey cells are basically becoming tiny armored tanks with abandonment issues. Every drop of seawater has become a petty, passive-aggressive standoff between things that want to eat and things that want to survive long enough to divide once and give up. It's not an ecosystem, it's a stress simulator, and through all this, through the chasing, the engulfing, the chemical gossip, and flagella slap fights, one thing becomes clear: complexity isn't going away. It's not efficient, it's not even very good, but it's sticking. The eukaryotes are bloated, slow, and constantly on the verge of imploding under their own organelle drama, but they can do one thing better than the competition: adapt on the fly. They've got genes they can switch on and off. They've got compartments for all their weird biological moods. They've got enough internal chaos to make new structures by accident. And it's those accidents, the ones that don't kill them instantly, that keep compounding into innovation. Sometimes the innovation is useful, like creating digestive vacuoles to safely store your enemies before melting them down into juice. Sometimes it's less useful, like forming giant surface bumps that do absolutely nothing except look like evolutionary acne. But whatever, it's progress. Meanwhile, deeper in the water column, the anaerobes are getting salty. Not metaphorically, literally. They're forced into increasingly extreme environments. Salt flats, briny ponds, hypersaline hellholes. Because oxygen is now basically everywhere that's nice. So the old-school microbes adapt. Again, they modify enzymes. They pump ions. They learn to love misery. It's a recurring theme on planet Shmearth: survive by getting weird. Back on land, yes, we're checking in. The microbial crusts are evolving a chip on their shoulder. They're still flaking off rocks in the sun and reconstituting themselves every time it rains. But now they're doing it with structure. Stratified layers. Top layers that photosynthesize. Bottom layers that just sort of rot and provide insulation. Middle layers full of unqualified microbes trying their best not to get oxidized. It's not a forest, it's not even a lawn, it's the biological equivalent of a mildew sandwich. But hey, it's holding the dust in place, cracking the rock, and maybe, just maybe, laying the groundwork for real terrestrial ecosystems in a few billion years. Meanwhile, the atmosphere continues to get ideas above its station. The oxygen content is still low, but it's enough to start causing problems. Things are rusting faster. Sulfides are turning into sulfates. Trace metals are changing their chemical behavior like they're going through puberty. The planet's surface chemistry is becoming reactive, unpredictable, and deeply annoying to anyone who doesn't like being constantly oxidized. Which is most life, by the way, but not all. Some microbes are leaning in. They're developing enzymes that use oxygen directly, not just tolerating it, but exploiting it. These enzymes are fragile, complex, and prone to breaking. But when they work, they allow for chemical reactions that are faster, hotter, and way more energetic than anything anaerobes could ever dream of. It's like trading in your old rotary phone for a flamethrower. Risky, overkill, but undeniably powerful. And that power translates into speed. Cells can grow faster, move faster, react faster. And in evolutionary terms, speed is everything. It means more chances to mutate, more chances to innovate, more chances to become the first single-cell jackass that accidentally invents something like sex. Spoiler, we're not there yet. But the groundwork is being laid. Elsewhere in the water, the eukaryotes are starting to diversify. Not in a fun, safari kind of way. More like a spreadsheet full of barely different blob types with slightly different chemical tolerances. But the fact remains, there's now eukaryotic variety. Some are lean and fast, optimized for hunting. Others are bloated and slow, built for photosynthesis and daydreaming. A few are opportunists, switching strategies depending on how chaotic their environment is that afternoon. And that, ironically, starts to stabilize things, because when everyone's doing something different, the system stops swinging wildly between boom and bust. You've got niches, roles, biochemical boundaries. It's a sloppy, micro-scale version of ecological balance, with more ooze. And of course, someone has to ruin it. That someone predictably is oxygen, again. Because now there's just too much of it. The buffers are full. The seafloor can't rust any more than it already has. The atmosphere can't absorb it fast enough. So oxygen begins accumulating faster than the planet can hide it. And for every microbe that sees it as a golden opportunity, there's another one getting shredded at the molecular level. Extinction events start rolling through the microbial world like slow, invisible tsunamis. Oxygen hits a threshold and entire lineages blink out. They can't mutate fast enough. They can't hide deep enough. They just vanish. It's not dramatic. There are no bones, no screams. Just a subtle shift in isotope ratios that tells you something died and it probably smelled bad while doing it. Meanwhile, survivors get better, meaner, more adaptable. And a few, just a few, start coordinating their behaviors in ways that should not be possible without brains. Biofilms begin communicating. Chemical signaling gets more complex. Some microbes send out molecules that suppress competitors. Others release signals that tell their friends when to form spores, when to hibernate, or when to swarm and cover a surface like a protein-powered nightmare. It's not thinking. but it's close enough to be unsettling. And in this swirling mess of slime, death, and oxidation, one very weird thing starts to happen. Time stops mattering, because now life is not just reacting, it's anticipating. A storm rolls in, and a biofilm shuts down photosynthesis before the clouds hit. A shift in salinity, and half a mat goes dormant while the other half doubles its reproduction rate. It's subtle, it's low-tech, but it's the beginning of long-term strategy. Earth isn't just alive anymore, it's responsive, and that, in evolutionary terms, is pure nightmare fuel. Responsive life. Fantastic. Now every bacterial smear has an opinion and a contingency plan. You can't even float around in the ocean anymore without some crusty biofilm reacting to your chemical signature like you're a security threat. Welcome to the next phase of microbial passive aggression. The signal molecules get more refined. Instead of just dumping hormones into the water like a chemical tantrum, microbes begin using sequences. Strings of molecules that mean different things depending on context. It's not language, it's not even Morse code. But it's organized noise, and that's enough to scare every future organism with a nervous system. Meanwhile, the predators are evolving again. Because of course they are. If you're a single-celled blob with a flexible membrane and you realize you can fold yourself into a scoop, you don't ask questions, you start scooping. Pseudopods get longer, more coordinated. Some cells evolve complex cytoskeletons, internal frameworks that let them change shape like nightmare origami. And once they've got structure, they start experimenting. One develops a tail, but only uses it for steering. Another grows adhesive patches to trap smaller cells. One especially enthusiastic lineage invents a rear-facing digestive pocket. Yes, a literal butt mouth, and becomes the most efficient backward-feeding organism on the planet for about 6 weeks until it chokes on itself. That one doesn't make it, but the idea sticks. Shape matters. Predators with defined fronts and backs start outperforming the blob brigade. Movement becomes more than flailing. It becomes directed, coordinated. Cells begin mapping their environments, chemically, spatially, and metabolically. If a cell can remember where food was 5 seconds ago, it has an advantage. If it can avoid where its cousin exploded last week, even better. And so, memory sneaks in. Not real memory, not synapses, but localized feedback loops, chemical echoes that let cells make decisions that look disturbingly intentional. Which, again, they are not, but they look like it. And that's the entire theme of this era, nature LARPing as intelligence without paying the processing costs. Back in the shallows, the microbial mats are becoming fortresses. They're no longer just random piles of slime. They've got gradients, architecture, defense mechanisms, top layers that reflect harmful light, bottom layers that secrete toxins, middle layers that act like biochemical gatekeepers, deciding who gets to pass and who gets digested slowly over a 6-hour period while the rest of the mat watches. And like any fortress, they attract attention. Some microbes evolve the ability to live on the mats without being part of them, hangers-on that skim the nutrient overflow like opportunistic plankton. Others evolve to drill in, piercing through the biofilm layers like bacterial burglars, stealing oxygen and leaving chemical graffiti. This prompts a response. Naturally, mats evolve surface sensors. They start releasing antimicrobial molecules when strangers approach. You can't even touch one without getting dosed by a microbial version of mace. And if you manage to burrow in, congratulations. You're now being dissolved by 7 generations of waste enzymes and passive-aggressive defense proteins. So the drillers adapt again. Some evolve sticky tips to anchor in place. Others develop stealth coatings, membrane chemistries that mimic the mat's own signature to sneak past the defenses. Welcome to biochemical espionage. It's like James Bond. If Bond were a cell with no face and his gadgets were proteins that smelled like mud. Meanwhile, oxygen is still doing its thing. It's now common in surface waters. The deeper zones still have their anaerobic clubs, but those are shrinking. And in the sky, ozone continues thickening. The UV death rays are officially less deadly. Still not recommended for casual exposure, but survivable if you're into that whole not instantly dying vibe. With UV reduced, life creeps even closer to land. More biofilms cling to more rocks. Some form crusts that withstand dry spells better than others. A few start manipulating their outer membranes to retain moisture. Not well, not long, but just enough to photosynthesize for an extra 10 minutes before becoming beef jerky. And that 10 minutes matters because every extension, every fluke, every flailing survival attempt gets logged into the evolutionary slot machine. Most fail, some don't, and the ones that don't are now forming the first semi-stable land-based microbial communities. Still no plants, still no roots. Just crime rings of cyanobacteria and their friends stuck to wet rocks and hoping the wind doesn't peel them off before sunset. Elsewhere, the eukaryotes continue pushing the definition of reasonable. Some lineages are now dividing labor between generations. One generation builds the colony structure, the next occupies it. The third scavenges whatever's left after the whole thing collapses in a burst of protein waste and metabolic hangovers. Others try different tactics. One develops a secretion system so powerful it can dissolve competitors from several microns away. Another starts storing poison in external sacs, which burst when attacked, sacrificing the cell but taking everyone within a 5-micron radius down with it. Suicide bombing, microbial addition. And yet from this escalating arms race, something new emerges, stability by design. Some colonies don't just survive random mutations, they begin reinforcing beneficial structures. Over generations, the blob gets less blob-like. Internal regions become distinct. Edges become specialized. Reproduction gets tied to internal roles. This is not just a pile of cells anymore. It's hierarchy. It's biological zoning. It's the earliest whisper of something with parts, and it's all still invisible, still silent, still incredibly stupid. But it's progress. Which, on planet Shmearth, is just evolution repeatedly smashing its face into the same wall until a door falls out. So now we've got colonies with zoning laws. Excellent. At this rate, someone's going to invent property taxes and ruin everything. The mat-based societies of slime are starting to resemble very early, very wet suburbs. There are outer cells for protection, inner cells for maintenance, middle cells for metabolizing regret. Nobody's having fun, but the system works. Kind of. Until it doesn't, and the whole thing collapses because one lineage forgot how to fix its membranes. Again. And this collapse, it's important. Because decay is no longer just gross, it's strategic. Rotting colonies release nutrients, dead cells enrich the environment, Some microbes even specialize in corpse management, swooping in to liquefy what's left and soak up the chemical leftovers. They're not decomposers yet. They're just scavengers with no shame. And it turns out, death is a great way to fertilize innovation. Around these messy biochemical graveyards, complexity flourishes. Some cells figure out how to wait nearby and leech off the chaos. Others begin to time their reproduction cycles to coincide with mat collapses, like vultures, if vultures were single-celled and constantly sticky. We're starting to see the beginnings of ecological succession. One microbe ruins a place, another takes over, not because they agreed on it, just because death creates space and life hates a vacuum almost as much as it hates oxygen. Which is ironic because oxygen is still rising, and fast. Let's talk numbers. Not real numbers. We're not that kind of documentary, but metaphorical numbers. The kind that say, if oxygen was annoying before, now it's an existential crisis. The atmosphere is no longer just oxygen adjacent, it's oxygen infused. The oceans are belching it, the biofilms are exhaling it. And with all the iron rusted out and buried in sedimentary shame, there's nothing left to absorb it. Which means it starts accumulating. Which means things start dying. Again. The second wave of extinction is worse than the first. Deeper, broader, slower, but more thorough. Anaerobes vanish from places they once dominated. Chemical refuges get smaller, ecosystem diversity craters. It's not a mass extinction like the flashy ones later. No asteroids, no screaming, no fossilized drama. Just slow suffocation by atmospheric progress. Some of the survivors go underground, literally. They move into pores in the rock, tiny cracks, tiny gaps, anywhere oxygen can't reach. They become the first known agoraphobes in biological history, terrified of the open air and hiding out in geological basements. Others get creative. They invent enzymes to detoxify oxygen. They start using nitrate or sulfate as fallback metabolic partners. They create entire metabolic shadow economies just to keep breathing in a world that wants them dead. And for those who embrace the chaos, the aerobes, the oxidizers, the energy junkies, it's a gold rush. Never before has the biosphere offered so much ATP per molecule. Suddenly there's energy for things that used to be biologically ridiculous, like movement, not twitching or drifting, actual movement, deliberate motion with a front and a back, and a reason. Flagella evolve steering, cilia evolve coordination. Some cells start spinning, others start paddling, and a few just corkscrew their way through the water like they're late to a party they don't understand. This mobility, it's revolutionary. Because now cells can choose where to go, not just float and hope, but navigate, hunt, flee, migrate between gradients like they read the tide schedule and packed accordingly. And with movement comes new strategy, ambush predation for one. Some cells now hide near chemical gradients and wait for prey to drift by. When they do, out comes the pseudopod, the enzyme burst, the membrane trap. It's like a bear trap made of goo. Others invent pursuit. Not fast pursuit. Nothing here is fast. But relentless, dogged chasing. They sense the chemical trail of prey and follow it like a revenge plot written in ATP. If they catch you, you get digested. If they don't, you just spend the next 6 hours wondering if that bubble behind you is still getting closer. And then there are the fakers. Some microbes evolve mimicry, chemical disguise. They produce surface markers that trick other cells into thinking they're harmless, or useful, or part of the same colony. They infiltrate mats, sabotage communities, steal nutrients, and leave before anyone notices. It's espionage by osmosis. No brain, no spine, all betrayal. This adds another layer to the ecosystem, trust, or the complete lack of it. Microbial societies are now paranoid. They start verifying chemical signals, requiring multiple confirmations, creating quorum-sensing networks with built-in authentication. It's the world's first cybersecurity protocol, and it's built entirely out of lipids and distrust. And in the middle of all this biochemical subterfuge, something unexpected starts happening in a few particularly stressed lineages. Cells stop dividing symmetrically. Instead of making 2 equal daughters, some cells begin producing 1 active offspring and 1 dormant. One cell keeps doing the work, the other shuts down and waits. A backup, a survivor. This asymmetric division becomes a new survival strategy. It's inefficient, it's weird, but it works because when the environment turns hostile, the dormant offspring survives. It reactivates later, rebuilds the colony, keeps the lineage going. And eventually, this asymmetric nonsense becomes something else. Some cells stop reproducing altogether. They just exist to support the ones that do. They defend, they nourish, they sacrifice, not on purpose. Not because they're noble, but because the group survives better when roles are distributed. Congratulations! You now have specialized cells that do not pass on their genes. That, unfortunately, is the definition of a body plan. It's awful, it's inefficient, it's the start of everything, and just like that, biology crosses a line it can never uncross. Cells that don't reproduce, cells that exist solely to help other cells reproduce. It's noble, tragic, and deeply stupid, but it works. And anything that works, no matter how convoluted or sacrificial or emotionally exhausting to narrate, will eventually get repeated until it becomes a standard feature. This is how we end up with early multicellular organisms that function less like colonies and more like dysfunctional startup companies. One cell has the vision, another one does the grunt work. A third just exists to yell about threats and explode when triggered, and the rest floating along pretending it's all fine. Meanwhile, structural differentiation is getting out of hand. Some colonies are developing interior cavities, spaces where the outer cells block light, toxins, and predators, while the inner ones float in peaceful ignorance, doing the metabolic equivalent of sipping tea and manifesting abundance. These proto-organisms are like extremely soft-armored castles, filled with sugar factories and the occasional digestive nightmare. They're not efficient and they're not pretty, but they're organized, which is frankly shocking, even more shocking. Some of them start producing signaling molecules that regulate development. One blob grows an arm, another decides it's time to specialize, a third just stops dividing and dies in place to make room. This isn't a colony anymore, this is a sad, slimy precedent, and it's happening more than once. Multiple lineages independently start doing this. Evolution, true to form, keeps tripping over the same mistake and deciding its destiny, not because there's a master plan, but because nothing has failed hard enough to stop the trend. And in this newly competitive post-body plan world, the predators also level up. Forget chasing, forget scooping. Some cells evolve projectiles, tiny spikes, filaments, or enzyme-laced darts they can launch at nearby cells. It's still all chemicals, of course. Nobody has bones or weapons yet, but the intent is there. If a cell can chemically impale another cell from a distance, it will, and it'll do it again and again and again until the rest of the microbial world either armors up or dies trying. The prey, same song, worse dance, defense gets more complicated, slime shields, external sheaths, flexible membranes that bounce enzyme attacks. One group evolves a gelatinous halo that's literally just an empty buffer zone filled with garbage molecules to slow down intruders. It's the biological version of surrounding yourself with bubble wrap and bad vibes. Some microbes flee to the dark, others to the mud. A few just stay where they are and double down on becoming chemically invisible. There is no peace here, only adaptation and occasional liquefaction. And in the ocean at large, nutrient cycling is becoming eerily efficient. For the first time, entire metabolic networks are developing outside of single organisms. One group releases ammonia, another uses it to make nitrate, a third turns it into nitrogen gas. Everyone's plugged into each other's exhaust systems. It's not cooperation, it's biochemical codependence, the world's first fully integrated waste management system, and no one signed up for it. With these cycles locked in, biomass increases, slowly, pathetically, but it increases. Ocean chemistry starts shifting under the weight of its own biology. More life means more byproducts. More byproducts mean more niches. And more niches mean more excuses for cells to get weird. Enter the mixotrophs. These are cells that refuse to pick a lane. They photosynthesize when the sun is out. They hunt when it's not. Some can switch metabolic pathways depending on the water's chemistry, the light's intensity, or their mood. It's the ultimate evolutionary hedge. Part plant, part predator, part indecisive mess. Mixotrophs are slow, unfocused, biochemically chaotic, and for a brief window of time, they absolutely dominate. Not because they're good at anything, but because they're good enough at everything to not die. That's the new standard. Elsewhere, the oceans begin to stratify even more. There are now consistent biological zones, the photic layer up top, where sunlight rules and photosynthesizers posture like it's Coachella, the mid-layer where oxygen fades and the real metabolic hustle begins, and the dark depths where extremophiles carry on as if none of this ever happened, because to them it hasn't. The seafloor is still a hot mess of sulfur, pressure, and seething thermal rage. And in those vents, the original anarchists, archaea, continue to thrive. They don't care about oxygen. They don't care about light. They don't even care about you. They're out here fermenting rocks, exchanging electrons, and generally vibing like it's 3.9 billion years ago. And the oxygen still rising, still creeping, still turning the planet into a slow-motion crime scene, which brings us to the final insult of this evolutionary stage, biofouling. That's right. Some microbes are now evolving to colonize other organisms, not as predators, not as parasites, but as lazy hitchhikers. They glom onto bigger cells, suck up the leftovers, and form little film communities on the backs of creatures that don't even realize they've been claimed. It's the microbial equivalent of moving into someone's hair and starting a band. And it works, because why evolve your own defenses when you can ride on someone who already has them? So now we have hitchhiker microbes living on larger blobs like sticky freeloaders at a protein party, and none of the hosts even know it's happening. Because reminder, no one has a nervous system. No nerves, no sensors, no, hey, there's a colony growing on my backside awareness. Just slow, clueless, gelatinous drift through a world increasingly defined by biological squatting. The hitchhikers aren't predators, but they're not exactly helpful either. They excrete waste. They block nutrient flow. Some start stealing incoming sunlight. A few begin to chemically reprogram their hosts. Yes, it's still early, but congratulations. You've just unlocked parasitism. The miracle of one organism existing entirely to annoy and exhaust another, without even having the decency to do it from a safe distance. And once that door opens, it doesn't close. Soon, some cells evolve specialized anchoring structures, molecular Velcro to stay latched onto moving hosts. Others begin secreting enzymes that erode just enough of the host's membrane to sip their nutrients without killing them outright. The first slow-motion vampires, still single-celled, still dumb, but disturbingly effective. Meanwhile, the hosts begin adapting too. Some evolve surface patterns that slough off freeloaders. Others develop mucus-like coatings that deter invaders. A few just mutate so unpredictably that nothing can attach to them without getting chemically ghosted. It's not immunity, it's just being unpleasant to live on. And in the arms race of who can make who more uncomfortable, we get our first complex host-parasite dynamics, not relationships. That implies consent. This is biochemical stalking. It's a system of attack and counterattack based entirely on who can tweak their membrane chemistry slightly faster that week. Elsewhere, multicellular nonsense continues escalating. Some colonies now alternate between free-floating and anchored forms. One moment, they drift. The next, they attach to a surface, spread out, and enter a metabolic frenzy. Then they release spores, die dramatically, and start over. It's not a life cycle. It's a routine, a bad one. But bad routines are how multicellular life gets born. Do something dumb, survive, repeat. The anchored colonies start forming rudimentary structures, stalks, bulges, fronds, little protrusions optimized for light, nutrient absorption, or simply looking like they're trying. There's no coordination, no elegance, just the brutal trial and error of cells repeatedly stabbing at possibility. One lineage invents a stalk so tall it collapses under its own weight and smothers everything around it. Another creates a wide, flat body that photosynthesizes beautifully and immediately gets covered in parasitic hitchhikers because it's basically a mobile buffet. Neither survives long-term, but their mistakes get copied, tweaked, and eventually integrated into newer, less idiotic designs. And in this mess, structural stability becomes a currency. The colonies that can hold their shape, even slightly, start outperforming the floppy ones, especially in turbulent shallows where waves toss around anything too mushy to matter. And that leads to the next big trend: extracellular matrix. Basically, glue. Cells begin secreting proteins and polysaccharides that hold them together, not just membranes pressed against membranes, but actual connective goop that forms scaffolding. These sticky biofilms provide strength, flexibility, and just enough coherence to qualify as not a disaster trademark. This matrix isn't intelligent. It doesn't grow intentionally, but it holds cells in place long enough for the rest of the colony to evolve around it. Imagine trying to build a house with wet spaghetti and a glue stick and then realizing the glue stick is evolving into bricks. That's where we are. With this structural glue comes opportunity. Some cells embed deeper into the matrix and give up mobility. Others stay on the surface to interact with the environment. A few go full reclusive monk and stay buried in the middle, doing nothing but processing nitrogen and silently judging everyone else. Congratulations, the colony has tiers, layers, roles, and with roles comes the creeping specter of communication. Some cells now produce signaling molecules only when triggered, by light, by touch, by chemical gradients. Others respond to these molecules by changing behavior. You've got proto-nervous systems minus the nerves. Signals ripple through the colony, changing cell function as they go, not instantly, not reliably, but it's happening. A colony that once just existed now responds. One section detects a predator and sends out a warning. Another section prepares defensive enzymes. Another section just panics and dumps its entire ATP reserve in a biochemical scream. That one dies, obviously, but the colony survives. And the next generation learns to do it slightly less chaotically. This is how you build intelligence. Not all at once, not with brains, with signals, with repetition, with failure that mutates into foresight. And while this is going on up top, the oceans below are still teeming with extremophiles who think all of this is incredibly dumb. The archaea in the deep sea vents are unbothered, still metabolizing sulfur, still thriving at 400 degrees Celsius, still too proud to participate in anything trendy. They are the evolutionary equivalent of wearing the same outfit for 4 billion years and daring someone to comment. And now, these deep-sea weirdos are evolving entirely separate biochemistries. Alternative amino acids, reverse chirality, enzymes that work in acid baths. These aren't just different species, they're practically a different version of life. Unrelated, unimpressed, and completely immune to everything the surface is stressing about. Which is perfect because the surface, it's about to melt down again. You see, with oxygen building in the atmosphere and methane levels dropping, the planet is cooling. Too much oxygen, not enough greenhouse gas, and suddenly your warm, cozy microbial world is teetering on the edge of a snowball event. Not quite yet, but almost. Ah, yes, the looming threat of planetary deep freeze. Nothing says progress like photosynthesizing yourself into an extinction. As oxygen continues its hostile takeover of the atmosphere, methane, Earth's favorite cozy blanket, gets chemically drop-kicked out of relevance. The result? Temperatures begin to wobble like a toddler carrying soup. Not a full-on ice age yet, but definitely chillier than the microbial scene would prefer. There are murmurs, there are chemical panics, there are entire species that simply fold and disappear the moment it dips below lukewarm puddle. Naturally, some microbes panic evolve. Cold tolerance becomes the new trend. Cell membranes get squishier, more unsaturated, like biological antifreeze. Some develop proteins that keep their insides from crystallizing. Others just go dormant and hope the weather remembers to unfrost them later. And then, of course, there are the opportunists. A handful of eukaryotes discover that if you huddle together in mucus clumps and share waste heat, you don't freeze to death quite as fast. They don't know this. They're not cuddling. They're chemically clumping out of desperation. But still, another accidental win for Team Multicellularity. These stress responses start snowballing, pun fully intended. Cells that coordinate cold resistance begin surviving longer. Colonies with better internal communication bounce back faster after frost. Suddenly, biochemical organization becomes a matter of life and thaw. Some colonies develop actual layering strategies. Outer sacrificial cells that freeze first, inner protected ones that stay viable. These outer cells die heroically and silently, not because they chose to, but because they're in the wrong place at the wrong time and are made of slightly worse goo. This arrangement, It gets passed on, not genetically but structurally. Colonies that build themselves this way survive. Others don't. Evolution doesn't care about fairness. It cares about not being dead. Meanwhile, in slightly warmer equatorial zones, life goes about its usual business of creeping toward complexity while refusing to be efficient. Here, some colonies go vertical. Yes, vertical. Like towers, stalks made of layered cells glued together with secreted protein soup. The top cells photosynthesize. The bottom cells handle anchoring and nutrient absorption. The middle cells mostly suffer. It's like living in a microbial tenement where the view sucks and the plumbing is made of enzymes. These early stalk colonies are biomechanical disasters. They collapse in wind. They dry out fast. They're constantly invaded by freeloaders, but they try, and trying is apparently enough. Even worse, some colonies begin to develop temporary motility. That's right. Structures that form just long enough to move the colony a few microns, then collapse like a bad idea. This includes flagellar bursts, pseudopodial flops, and the evolutionary equivalent of rolling downhill in a garbage bag. Is it locomotion? Barely, but it's direction, intent, action. The colony becomes not just a thing that reacts, it becomes a thing that does. And with motion, once again comes predation. Some of the larger eukaryotes now hunt entire colonies, slowly, painfully, but effectively. They wrap around them, secrete dissolving compounds, and slurp the remains like a chunky smoothie of regret. The colonies fight back, of course. Some develop emergency detachment, popping off parts of themselves as decoys while the rest escapes. Others start producing bitter-tasting proteins that discourage ingestion because apparently disgusting yourself into survival is a valid strategy now. And then there are the screamers. Not literal screams, but signal cascades. A single punctured cell releases a wave of molecules that alerts the whole colony to danger. Some cells change their surface chemistry. Others release repellents. A few just explode out of sheer panic. It's messy. It's inefficient. But it sometimes works. And sometimes works is more than enough. Elsewhere, chemical signaling evolves nuance. Instead of just on or off, cells begin layering information. Not just there is danger, but where, how much, and what kind. These signals form gradients, patterns, ripples of response that reshape entire colonies in seconds. The result? Dynamic multicellularity. You don't just have roles, you assign them. You don't just survive. You adapt collectively as a group of idiots pretending to be a brain. And it's almost convincing. Until you zoom in and realize half the colony is still just vibrating incoherently and dumping ATP on the ground because their enzymes never finished puberty. But hey, progress. And above all of this, oxygen continues its rise. Not quietly, not politely, but as a gas with no off switch and no chill. Soon it will cross a threshold. Soon the planet will remember what it's like to freeze properly. But not yet. For now, the biosphere hangs in chemical tension, half thriving, half suffocating, all teetering on the edge of a cold, oxygenated, accidental apocalypse. So we're wobbling toward planetary hypothermia while colonies scream chemically and eukaryotes play blob chess with photosynthesis and death. In other words, everything's still awful, just with slightly better cell signaling. But now we start getting structure with memory. A few colonies are beginning to remember past stress by adjusting their future development. No, not memory like, I recall what happened last Tuesday, but more like, the last time we got freeze-dried. Don't build that flimsy cell wall again, Dave. It's epigenetic, it's molecular, and it's terrifying. These organisms aren't just surviving events, they're leaving biochemical fingerprints on their offspring, inheritance without genes, trauma baked into structure. It's the biological equivalent of passing down anxiety through cell walls. Meanwhile, some clever little lineages start experimenting with spores, not the kind that float gently through the air. No, these are desperate, sealed-off, metabolically dead panic rooms. A cell wraps itself in protein armor, dehydrates, and hopes for the best. Spoiler: it usually dies anyway, but sometimes it doesn't. And those that don't, legends. Spores are the microbial way of saying, "I'm out. Wake me when the apocalypse is over." And considering how the climate's trending, this is both wise and increasingly necessary. Back up in the not quite frozen surface layers, the stalk colonies have gotten weird. Some now build themselves in cycles. They grow tall, reproduce, collapse, fertilize the next round. Others alternate forms depending on sunlight, flat in the morning, puffed up in the afternoon. One lineage invents a daily rhythm, expanding and contracting like a slow-motion jelly lung. Why? No reason, just vibes. But it turns out that rhythmic cycles, even dumb, wobbly ones, start reinforcing behavior. One signal leads to another, one state predicts the next. You don't have a clock, but you act like you do. Welcome to the earliest hints of circadian rhythm, brought to you by sheer accident and photochemical guilt. And of course, with all this structure, parasites take notice. Again, some microbes begin specializing entirely in colony invasion. They don't form mats, they don't build towers, they just lurk nearby watching. When a multicellular structure forms, they burrow in, hijack the signaling system, and start reproducing like it's a fire sale. A few even figure out how to redirect colony resources, draining nutrients to feed themselves while the host colony slowly dies of confusion. It's parasitic puppetry with no strings and no brain, and it's horrifyingly effective. The victims begin to respond. Colonies evolve kill switches, self-destruct routines that trigger when internal chemistry gets too weird. If something hijacks the matrix, boom, the whole thing dissolves. Everyone dies. But the lineage lives on via spores, fragments, or just angry cousins drifting nearby. It's insurance, not defense, but it's enough. Meanwhile, nutrient availability continues to shift. As biomass accumulates, decomposition ramps up. The oceans are becoming a literal soup of life, death, slime, waste, and unresolved evolutionary trauma. Some of the chemical layers become so complex, they stratify like a failed wedding cake. Top layer, light and smugness. Middle layer, metabolic negotiation. Bottom layer, rot and resentment. And then, some colonies learn to move as a unit. No, not swimming, flowing. They begin to extend forward, not with limbs, but as coordinated sheets. Leading edge cells move first, dragging others along via cytoplasmic bridges and shared chemical gradients. It's not coordinated like a school of fish. It's more like a pile of wet pancakes slowly oozing down a countertop. But it's real, and it gets them away from danger. The first proto-motile multicellular organisms. Not fast, not smart, but deliberate. Some use this to relocate, others to expand territory. A few just use it to overwhelm slower prey. Imagine being eaten by a biological tarp. That's your life now. And then there's reproduction. Up until now, reproduction has been boring, copy, split, repeat. But now, with multicellular structure, reproduction starts to get fancy. Some colonies reproduce by fragmenting, breaking off chunks that regrow into the same exact nonsense. Others start holding back certain cells to act as future progenitors, early germline logic. You've got a group that only reproduces and another that only supports. That's differentiation. That's lineage. That's dangerously close to strategy. It's also a complete mess. Half of these strategies fail catastrophically. Some colonies invest too heavily in support cells and forget to reproduce. Others reproduce constantly and collapse under their own metabolic debt. But some strike just the right balance. And those are the ones that keep going. Because now it's not just about surviving, it's about persisting. Maintaining form, passing traits, avoiding parasites, coordinating motion, dodging climate swings, and dealing with freeloaders, all without a nervous system, a spine, or an ounce of common sense. Life is becoming systemic. Cells are no longer the only unit of evolution. Colonies are, and just like that, the slime has unionized. Not with meetings or contracts or any awareness whatsoever, but structurally, which honestly is more effective. The colony is now the survival strategy. Individual cells, disposable, swappable, redundant. It's all about the greater ooze. We've reached the point where what matters isn't what the organism is made of, but how it's arranged. And whether that arrangement can get through another day of solar radiation, chemical warfare, and unexpected glaciation without collapsing into a soup of biological regret. And wouldn't you know it, some of these arrangements are starting to get consistent, predictable, repeatable. You divide, you differentiate, you expand in a radial pattern, you develop a surface layer of hardened protein junk, and boom, you've got what passes for a multicellular blueprint. Again, nobody planned this. These are not design choices. These are repeated mistakes that just happen to work slightly better than death. Meanwhile, in the slightly less toxic coastal shallows, things are getting vertical again, not in a majestic kelp forest way, more like a soggy stack of pancakes way. Columnar mats rising inch by inch, layer by layer, supported by sheer biochemical spite and the occasional protein scaffold. These pillars, if you can even call them that, begin to reshape their environment. They slow currents, they trap sediment, they build microclimates of shade, turbulence, and biochemical gossip. Tiny tide pools form in their folds, giving rise to niche environments, which in turn give rise to niche organisms. Because of course they do. Evolution sees a crack in a rock and immediately throws 40 different metabolic strategies at it. Now let's talk waste. Life is producing so much of it now that the oceans have basically become one giant garbage soup with tiny productivity zones floating in it. Decomposition becomes its own ecosystem. Some cells begin specializing entirely in metabolic cleanup. They don't hunt, they don't photosynthesize, they just eat dead things and fart out simpler molecules for everyone else to use. These decomposers become weirdly critical. Without them, entire regions choke on their own chemical leftovers. With them, resources get recycled, colonies thrive longer, and the overall biosphere functions like something that accidentally resembles balance. It's horrifying. It's disgusting. It's beautiful. Let's ruin it. Because now, finally, after billions of years of warm soups and passive-aggressive metabolism, Earth decides to take a big swing. Temperature begins to drop. Real drop, not a mild chill. We're talking runaway glaciation, because methane's gone, CO2's down, and the sun is still a weak little toddler bulb in the sky, with oxygen finally pushing the greenhouse gases into irrelevance. Shmearth begins to seize up. Snowball Earth? Not quite, but definitely slush ball Earth. Wide-scale ice sheets, massive planetary cooling, entire shallow ecosystems wiped out like a chalkboard under a rainstorm, and life adapts. Some microbes go dormant. Again. Some retreat to volcanic refuges. Again. Others evolve even more outrageous cold resistance strategies, like excreting sugar antifreeze or building tiny protein igloos around themselves. And the multicellular colonies. Shockingly, some make it. The goo towers collapse, the moving mats freeze, but the ones that survive do so because they're modular. Parts break, parts persist, spores form, core cells hunker down. The structure endures, even when 80% of the colony is dead weight. It's not a building. It's a fail-soft organism designed, no, accidentally evolved to withstand catastrophe. And when the climate relents just a little, when sunlight returns to the slush margins, these survivors reactivate, not individually, collectively. Like someone hit play on a moist, ancient cassette tape full of enzymes and ambition. They grow back, they adapt faster, they start building new structures that anticipate the cold, that plan for dormancy, that split reproductive and support functions with almost machine-like reliability. They're not alive in the way you understand it. They're alive in the way systems are alive. And suddenly, single-celled life doesn't look so impressive anymore, because something else has quietly, stupidly, inevitably arrived. Organisms. Organisms. There it is. The word you've been waiting for, even if the slime didn't. Not cells, not mats, not microbial cooperative pudding with a union card and no exit strategy. Real, full-on multicellular organisms, genetically identical cells arranged into specialized, integrated roles, coordinated by biochemical signals, wrapped in a shared structure that says, we are a thing, not just things, a thing. They're still dumb. Don't get excited. These aren't jellyfish or worms or even sponges. These are flappy blobs that barely hold themselves together. But the blueprint is there. Division of labor. Reproduction delegated to a small group of lucky freeloaders. Everything else exists just to protect, feed, or launch them. And once you get this kind of structure, you get something else, shape. Not just random blobs with sticky bits, actual recurring body forms, tubes, sheets, hollow spheres. Organisms begin using geometry as a survival tactic. A sphere has fewer surface cells to defend. A tube moves water better. A flat mat gets more light. It's not artistic. It's strategic laziness molded by physics and pain. With shape comes interaction. Some organisms start drifting toward one another during reproduction. Not mating. Just cluster mating. Big colonial explosions where a bunch of similar organisms all release spores or gametes into the water at once, purely to overwhelm chance. Think of it as anonymous spawning with strong festival energy and no cleanup crew. And because everything's dumping genetic material into the same soup at the same time, mistakes happen. Horizontal gene transfer goes wild. Not just swapping plasmids anymore. Entire chunks of nuclear DNA are suddenly showing up where they don't belong, getting integrated into genomes by accident and turning yesterday's metabolizer into tomorrow's predator. This is the dawn of true innovation. By plagiarism, one lineage starts processing sulfates better, another gets better light harvesting proteins, a third just becomes way better at not exploding when frozen, and every time a gene jumps, it brings the potential for a new lineage, a new strategy, a new disaster. Meanwhile, down in the muck, The decomposers are getting even more specialized. Some now attach directly to colonies and act like permanent recycling centers. A few start forming symbiotic partnerships, living on or inside larger organisms in exchange for waste cleanup and occasional chemical favors. Symbiosis, the first step toward roommates. It's all downhill from here. Above all this, the oxygen levels have finally stabilized, not because life stopped producing it, but because the biosphere is now big and complex enough to use it properly. There's a functioning oxygen cycle, there's carbon feedback, there's, dare we say it, ecosystem regulation. And so, for the first time, the planet isn't just teeming with life, it's being shaped by it. Tides carry spores, currents sculpt microbial towers. Even the atmosphere, now sporting a reasonably competent ozone layer, filters UV radiation just enough to make shallow waters a viable long-term habitat. Organisms begin expanding into zones that were previously unlivable for more than 6 minutes. Some even start experimenting with short-distance terrestrial expansion. Not plants, not even moss, but biofilms that ooze upward into damp soil cracks, form crude mats, and reproduce via tiny, slow-firing colonies that can go dormant for years if they get too dry. It's the equivalent of a slime-based land grab, and it's working. Each iteration survives slightly longer, sticks slightly better, wrecks the local mineral structure just enough to prep the surface for something bolder later. But that's another episode. For now, we close on the last of the slushball cold snaps receding. The skies are bluer, the water is clearer, the ice melts from the coasts and releases nutrients that fuel another bloom, another burst, another surge of complexity. The planet sighs, the biosphere stabilizes, and somewhere, in a shallow tidal pool littered with the cellular corpses of yesterday's evolutionary failures, a blob that's not quite a colony and not quite a single cell begins dividing. And doesn't stop. That thing? It's not important. Yet. But give it another billion years. We'll name it something ridiculous, and we'll pretend it was destined.